The self-image of the narcissistic person that they have to sustain is that they are great. And when that sense of perfection that they attempt to set up gets dinged by someone else's negative emotions, they don't apologize. They just call the other person manipulative. Okay, so a lot of people, a lot of survivors of narcissistic relationships, you have felt at times, or were told, that you're too much, or you can't cope, or we're called intense, or we're called angry. All these things come up all the time. So I'm going to share with you a story, okay? This is about a woman who experienced narcissistic relationships throughout her lifespan, okay? Had one narcissistic parent, one parent who could be loving, but was so lost in trying to appease the narcissistic parent that she experienced it as, let's call it abandonment, right? But it wouldn't be until adulthood that she would understand that, right? She recalled being so protective of that healthier parent, that idealizing that parent was part of how she managed all of it, right? Years later, she had to integrate the multiple truths that she had a loving parent who suffered from the narcissistic abuse, and in having to appease the narcissistic co-parent, the loving parent simply was not available, okay? Obviously, because this woman is now older, nobody talked about this being a narcissistic family system, right? And in fact, the narcissistic parent was often heralded as a family hero for all they did for everyone else in the family. They actually did do a lot for other people in the family. The child, when they were, this person an adult now, when they were a child, they simultaneously idealized and feared that narcissistic parent. So messy doesn't even begin to describe the situation, and I'm sure many of you have similar situations. So as a child, this woman recalls that she was super smart, she was empathic, she was perceptive, she was gentle, she was introspective, but she never felt fully safe. She could not have articulated it then. She understands that now. She also looks back and would recognize that from time to time, wasn't frequent, but from time to time, she does remember this very well, that she'd get very angry, very upset, and have what she described as meltdowns, like big tantrums. And she said she could count on one hand the number of times it happened. She said by and large, she was a very overregulated and overcontrolled child, and I could see that she was a very overregulated adult. But every so often she would get really mad. And a couple of times, those small number of times, it happened in school, and she got in trouble in school for doing this. And even her parents at times would call her intense, and she was angry, right? And it became a sort of family joke. But really, and I've spent enough time with this woman to say, this is not an angry person, not an angry person by nature at all. As she got older and she went into adolescence and then young adulthood, she remembered, she recalled, like she felt that anger inside of her. And she said it would sometimes bubble up that she'd say like kind of mean things about peers at school. Not often, but she would sometimes just feel angry about other people or about those relationships. And again, she would sometimes have those angry outbursts and sort of say angry things. And while she was largely valued as a disciplined high school, she was a good student in high school, the family maintained the narrative of her as this intense person. That's a word she kept using, intense. This followed her into adulthood, though it started coming out more in adulthood, as she described it as more as anxiety. She said she still would make some of those little kind of salty comments, and there was always this kind of brewing anger in her that she was never able to put a name to. But most of the time, she said she wasn't walking around the world as an angry person. She was warm, she was empathic, she never behaved in an entitled way. She had lots of friends. The reputation stuck of her being this intense person. She started to unpack it in therapy. And she began to realize that this was never anger or even intensity. It was a sort of natural kind of lashing out at the narcissistic abuse. These eruptions of anger that would come up in the midst of what were largely her fawning responses, freezing responses, submitting responses to what was happening around her. It wasn't until she was, again, well into adulthood, like after even her kids grew up, that she even began to understand it. And in her adulthood, she had experienced some narcissistic relationship and married to a narcissistic person and gotten divorced and had a narcissistic partner that she almost married, blah, blah, blah. With friends at work, she'd had worked with a narcissistic person, blah, blah, blah. But she never labeled it as such. And in those relationships, she was sometimes considered to be a bit of a malcontent. And she was frustrated because she was actually really good at containing herself, even when something was really unfair or unkind or empathic happened to her. But every so often, and she just couldn't contain it. And she then started to buy into this narrative that she's an intense, like an angrily intense person. So to offset that, she would really try to be kind to people. And this part wasn't fawning because she was actively doing it, right? She didn't want this narrative of her being an intense and demanding and difficult person to be sustained. So she would try harder and harder to push down her feelings, sometimes to the demise of her own health. In fact, in one of her cases, she stayed completely silent about a health problem because she was trying to be so stoic, and because she didn't want to be perceived as dramatic. She ended up in the hospital where she because she passed out in public one day, and it turned out she had developed a really, really severe kidney infection. So that pushing it down was actually to her demise. Now listen, if someone rolled up and laid it out for her, oh, this parent of yours and then friend of yours and partner of yours are narcissistic, they're never going to listen to you, they're never going to have empathy for you or take any accountability for their behavior, it would be painful to hear that. But you would not get lost in the hopeless struggle of trying not to react to anything, right? Which is what she was doing, and she didn't understand why. And the challenge was that about 95% of the time, this woman did not react at all. I've talked about this theme in other videos with other people too, ever. She kept very calm, and the tough part, as everyone knows from narcissistic relationships, is that the bad behavior often happens behind closed doors, in quiet, subtle ways that sort of devastate you, but that others can't see. They don't see someone yelling at you, or in some cases even hitting you, because that may not be happening. But instead, what is happening is sort of the death by 1,000 cuts of these relationships, the dozens of daily digs and fails, the unwillingness to carry their half of things, to get testy with you if you ask for even the smallest amount of help. You become a one-person show, and you tell yourself things like, oh, I just have an avoidant personality style because I just have to do everything by myself. I don't know that you have an avoidant personality style. If you don't do it, it ain't going to get done. And then sometimes you react. And that's when you'll get called intense or reactive or angry. So when this woman was in couples therapy, she initially did feel safe. She felt that, okay, now there's a referee in the room. So if my husband gets rageful or reactive, then I have someone in the room who will see it and maybe tell me that I'm not crazy. But then when the husband did get pissed that the therapist wasn't always seeing his way and always taking his side, he would get testy. And then the woman would say, do you see what he's doing? In that kind of an intense voice, as though finally someone else was there to see what was happening. And she thought she'd no longer feel crazy. But then the therapist said, whoa, that's intense. She literally used that word intense and said, you need to turn that down. Instead of pointing out the unkindness of the husband's words. And she then said, well, maybe your husband's reacting because you're intense. So, and the woman never, she didn't really behave like that at home. So the woman felt completely defeated by this. And her experience is not unique. And this can happen in couples therapy, with family members, and in friend groups. But this persistence is that the person in the relationship is intense when somebody finally sees it and you're like, do you see? And people call that intense. So what's the answer? It really depends on whether you can disconnect from the relationship or not. Some of it comes down to, honestly, to self-compassion. The world really, as a whole, still does not understand these relationships. And maybe I think it's more accurate to say the world doesn't want to understand these relationships. And to be kind to ourselves when we have what is still a very well-controlled reaction to what are very, very manipulative and unkind circumstances. to help people understand what is being done to them instead of simply judging their reactions, because that's what we tend to do. We judge their reactions instead of explaining what's going on. I'm not sure why we are so willing to let the narcissistic people get away with their rage or painstakingly explain it to them. But when a person reacts to a narcissistic person's anger or insults or manipulation, we tend to call the person reacting to them intense. I mean, honestly, it's a mystery to me. I keep trying to educate, but frankly, folks, I face more resistance than not about this. And I have a video coming about that soon, because the resistance to this is actually growing. That woman's story resonated so deeply with me for such a long time, because for years, and probably to this day, still to this day, I really felt it, because I've been called intense too. You're too much, you're too extra, RAMANI, you're too intense. And I took it on as my identity, but really I'm not. I'm not that intense. I care about things, I have empathy, I fight for the underdog, but I actually grew up in a way that reactions were simply not allowed. And I grew up at a time when school reactions were not allowed, so you just couldn't do those things. And I think I would have wanted the earth to swallow me up if a teacher got mad at me, right? So I've always had relationships where reactions were not allowed, and if I had one, I would be called intense and crazy. So I've kept quiet about some really horrible things that have happened to me so I wouldn't take up too much space. But were there times that I'd react? Sure. And I see now that people don't see the rest of the iceberg. That they often see us, and saw me, as I was making a kerfuffle about an ice cube and not an iceberg. It took me a lot more therapy than I care to admit to let go of that sense that I was intense and recognize that for the world to feel good about narcissistic folks, it's easier to call me and that woman and most people going through these relationships intense. That's a gaslight. I get it now, but damn. And I see this happen to people every single day. Healing, like I said, there's sort of that final stop on that healing train is individuation, meaning, and purpose. And part of that is knowing ourselves. Is reacting one time after not reacting most of the time a bad thing? Or is it better to never react? Listen, I like a little bit of genuine reaction to numbness, but sadly, I think the world would rather that most people in these relationships just put up and shut up. I'm going to tell you now, though, don't do it. The world may prefer it, but in the long run, it's not good for you. And it may be that the world throws a label on you that is not your label, and you recognize it for the gaslight that it is. The key is to not let it seep into your identity. Have you ever had this happen, that they tell you that you're crazy, and then they tell you that they love you in spite of that? So here's the scene. You're in a narcissistic relationship, and you're gaslighted a lot. The upshot of the gaslighting is that you feel insane, confused, and above all else, you believe that there's something wrong with you. Maybe now you think that you're the one who's too sensitive, or that you're an angry person, or that you're too demanding, or fussy, or needy, or that you're a real handful, whatever it is. The gaslighting is not just that you don't remember things or that you aren't in reality, but also that there is something wrong with you. And it happens enough, and if it happened in childhood, it's probably your identity. And basically then, attachment or remaining in this relationship requires that you buy into this idea that you are the crazy, foolish, selfish, whatever one. And this is the really dark part. Then they turn around and say, hey, I still love you even though you're a mess. So their gaslighting is largely what has left you feeling like there's something wrong with you. And then over time, sadly, you sort of kind of believe the manipulation. But where people can really get stuck is that when you believe all the bad stuff, I'm too sensitive, I'm too dramatic, I'm a mess, I'm all over the place, whatever it is, that the narcissistic person kind of galvanizes or strengthens the trauma bond by telling you that they're willing to find you lovable or do find you lovable despite what a mess you are. And sort of lurking under that is, and you sure are lucky you found me or have me in your life, because I'm willing to love you despite what a mess that you are. Nobody else would have done that. I have seen this happen time and again in intimate relationships. People being told things like, hey, you're lucky I have an appetite for crazy and drama and a hot mess, and I love you, even though that's who you are. You can see it in family relationships. We all love her chaos and her flakiness. It keeps us from being a boring family. Goodness knows that it's wasted our time and it costs us dearly, but we know that she needs our support. This could happen in workplaces, where you might hear, everybody needs someone who's a little weird like this one to keep staff meetings interesting. We have to be patient with it, and it can get annoying, but we like them being on the team. I'm sure you have your versions, right? And then this can happen in friendships. Oh gosh, we love how OCD she is. It means nothing gets forgotten on the trips. It's a lot to put up with because she can be a really obsessive handful, but we still love her. But the thing that these folks are saying, really, whether it's drama or chaos or weird or OCD, it actually isn't true. It's something that they are saying that you are and accuse you of being, but it's not true. And with time, because they say it so many times, you find yourself almost having to believe it to stay in the relationship. But then it's made to feel like they're doing you a favor for putting up with something that either isn't true about you or may be behavior that only comes out from having to navigate them. For example, you become this so-called OCD person because you have to stay on top of myriad details that an entitled or selfish friend can't be bothered with, and you have staved off disasters by staying on top of those details. The real challenge and key to surviving these relationships is to not believe the gaslighting narrative being given to you about who you are, whatever that is. Because if you hear something enough, you start to believe it. And especially in narcissistic family systems. Even if you're just being portrayed as the kooky or chaotic or dramatic one, at least it gives you some kind of discernible identity in a system that often has your identity shift based on what the narcissistic people want or need from you at any given moment. But by not buying into that narrative, then you have a fighting chance of seeing that their twisted conditional love, I love you even though you're needy. I love how weird you are. I really love how OCD you are. That either leaves you feeling like that A, nobody else would put up with you, and aren't you lucky that they do, or B, you aren't really lovable, and C, you're being liked for something about you that may not necessarily feel true. Well, needless to say, narcissistic relationships are where healthy love goes to die. And this isn't just unhealthy, it's distorted. Pay attention to this dynamic, and when you are told you are something that doesn't feel right or that it doesn't fit you, analyze it and ask, where did that characterization of me come from? Because that is often the fiction that is part of the whole gaslighted mess. And if they say that is why they love you, because you're messy and needy and crazy, and those things aren't true, then definitely the whole equation is out of whack because they love you for something that isn't true. What the hell does that mean? Healing is about knowing who you are. And the more we learn, that the less vulnerable we are to internalizing the gaslighted narratives we're hearing. But if you grew up with this, it feels like developing your identity is like inventing the wheel. A place where this can really, really get tricky is, in some cases, the things that they may be accusing you of, gosh, you are so depressed, you are so anxious, but still love you. And you may be depressed and anxious. So the thing that they're saying that I love you and I'm putting up with this thing. once again, it does put you on your back foot. This sense that, okay, these things are true about me. For example, maybe it's not just that you're highly organized or have to stay on top of details, that you may in fact have OCD or OCD adjacent characteristics. And those are things you may be working on in therapy or depression or anxiety or anything. That you're basically being told like, yeah, you're not well, but I still love you. And that entire feeling can always lead you to feel like you're always in a precarious position in these relationships. But ultimately, these are never places where you ever feel fully safe. And then when you do find out that you're being loved because of something that's not true about you, if you thought these relationships weren't confusing before, they can always get worse. So, have you ever showed genuine emotion in a narcissistic relationship and then you were told that you were being manipulative? Let's talk about that. So emotions go to narcissistic relationships to die, right? So emotion and narcissistic relationships do not mix. And your emotions, if they don't fully die, they're definitely going to be terribly abused. So think about this. You drop it in the comments if you want. What happened when you have expressed emotion in your narcissistic relationship? I'm going to offer you some guesses of what happened. You expressed genuine emotion in that relationship. You were either mocked, treated with contempt, screamed at, told you were exaggerating, told you you were too sensitive, told that you have no right to have that feeling. And I'm sure there's others you can add to that I didn't get to. But one that I've been hearing more often and have been hearing for a long time from people is that by showing genuine emotion, that you are being manipulative. That you showing whatever emotion that it may be, tears, anger, whatever, nervousness, that it's manipulative. The narcissistic person may assert that you're trying to punish them or upset them or throw them off their game on an important day or make them feel bad. So you showing whatever you are feeling, a real feeling, they write that off as manipulative because they don't like how it makes them feel. Now, the downstream effect of this is that most people in narcissistic relationships slowly start expressing less and less emotion, holding back more. They withdraw, they feel numb, they express less. It makes sense. There is really no point in showing the emotion. In fact, it's almost a little risky, right? That if you show your true emotion in one of these relationships, that you're either going to be gaslighted, shut down, deal with more abuse, or just really be invalidated. It doesn't feel good when you're vulnerable. So when you do start over time showing less and less emotion, and in essence really disengaging, then they may turn around and say you're being manipulative for not being present. So it's a catch-22. If you express emotion, you will be shut down or told you're being manipulative. If you don't show emotion and disengage, then you're being told that you're manipulative. So what are you supposed to do with all that emotion? Well, always remember rule number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in these narcissistic relationships, which is you can't win. It's their rules, and radical acceptance means recognizing that. It doesn't mean that you like it. Remember, radical acceptance is like, I'm good with this. It's just understanding that this is the nature of these relationships. You can also see how having a narcissistic parent can really do a number on you. That you, from a very young age, would have either had your emotion regarded with disgust or outright ignored, or be told or given the sense that any show of emotion from you was manipulative. People who grow up with narcissistic parents have their emotions pathologized from an early age and learn to tamp down those emotions so they can be a good kid in their parents' eyes. Kids just trying to survive. It's a dangerous message for children to get because over time they'll doubt their own emotions, clip their emotions, but those emotions have to go somewhere. And some kids may be vulnerable to struggle in lots of ways, which might include anxiety, dysregulation, impulsivity, self-harm, maladaptive behaviors such as substance use, disordered eating, or just going into a state of numbness. It can be difficult to learn and give yourself permission to actually express emotion if you were told not to express it as a kid or were made to feel that you are being manipulative by having a feeling. Now, this accusation by narcissistic people that your show of emotion, or frankly your lack thereof, is a manipulation is, as you have already likely guessed, a projection. Remember, narcissistic folks are out of control with their emotions, and some people who write about the theories of narcissism argue that narcissistic people are almost allergic to other people's emotions. So they just project their manipulativeness onto other people, and instead of having to deal with the shame of being an icky manipulative person, they just call other people manipulative. Now, the only way to survive in a narcissistic relationship is to disengage, but you have to pick your poison in terms of what you want to be called. Manipulative for, because you're going to be called manipulative, right? You're either going to be called manipulative for showing emotion, or you're going to be called manipulative for not showing emotion. The radical acceptance is simply that you recognize that, however it is, emotion's going to have no place in this relationship. Each narcissistic relationship is different in its way. For some of you, the safer path is to not show the emotion. And even if they call that behavior out as manipulative, it may leave you feeling less vulnerable with your true emotion. For others of you, it may actually be easier to just get into it with them and not have to endure their haranguing you and baiting you when you don't show emotion. Remember, narcissistic people do not ever like the sense that they did a bad thing. So your emotion, especially negative emotions like tears or sadness, can raise that flag, that sense that they did or said something bad, raise shame and then rage for them. Narcissistic people are not psychopathic. They're not completely devoid of feeling. They're just really riddled with shame. So your negative emotion, or the sense that maybe they hurt you, or other people are going to think that they hurt you, or that they did something that was wrong or bad, and that, again, other people will notice that was wrong or bad. It's not that they even care about hurting you. It's that the narcissistic person doesn't want to be viewed as a person who hurts people or does bad things. The self-image of the narcissistic person that they have to sustain is that they are great. And when that sense of perfection that they attempt to set up gets dinged by someone else's negative emotions, they don't apologize. They just call the other person manipulative. Healthy expression of emotion is good. This is going to be gross, what I'm about to say, but it's psychological excretion. It's like the psychological equivalent of taking a pee. Expressing emotion is good for us in so many ways. Gotta kind of let it go, right? And when we learn to do it appropriately, for example, express emotion without hurting someone else, that's good. In narcissistic relationships, emotion is expressed by the narcissist, but it is often quite unhealthy. Agitation and anger and the silent treatment. I have no doubt that more than a few of you have encountered this situation. There is no safe place to take genuine emotion in a narcissistic relationship. And then on top of that, to have your natural process of emotional expression be labeled as manipulative can continue to fuel self-doubt and confusion and self-blame. So when it happens, it's that unfortunate acceptance of the unfortunate nature of these relationships. Your showing emotion is healthy. The narcissistic people have an aversion to it, and the reminder it is to them of who they really are. They don't tolerate anything that ever makes them look like the bad guy or the bad gal or the bad person. But it is so important that you find those safe spaces to take that genuine emotion, because ultimately there is no safe space to take those emotions in a narcissistic relationship. And the vulnerability that being in an emotional space is, and then on top of that, being told you're manipulative, is a 1-2 punch that can cause endless pain in these relationships. So folks, here's the thing. Nobody wants to be estranged from their family. So this morning, I read an interesting article about whether cutting off your family is good therapy. And even as I read it, I knew it would not end well. Some of you, not a lot, but some of you watching this video have gone no contact with your family of origin. Some of you have not, and every encounter you continue to have with your family is abusive and invalidating. And for a range of reasons, you may feel like you can't go no contact. And those of you who do not perceive an issue with your families, or actually come from healthy families, are probably not watching this video. So to those of you who went no contact, I'm gonna ask you a couple questions. Was that an easy decision? Did you just go no contact after one argument? Did you go no contact because your family did one thing that hurt your feelings? Did you go no contact just because your parent didn't agree with you? My guess is no, you didn't. You went no contact because of an endless accumulation of wounds, hurts, invalidations, and in some cases, frank abuse and trauma that would be re-experienced every time you were with the narcissistic parent or family system. And ultimately, it became a choice between your identity and mental health and well-being and life, and continuing to see through some kind of obligation or guilt or sense that only people in really bad situations go no contact. To those of you who have not gone no contact, but keep enduring the same abusive patterns, I know the reasons that people stay in these family systems. Some people maintain contact because they feel guilt, obligation, doubt their own perception of the situation, and wonder if maybe they're reading it wrong, or they're being unfair, or they're making too big a deal out of it. Some of you stay in contact with a family because you have financial ties to a family, or because you are interlinked into a family system in which maybe you have children whom you want them to have a relationship with grandparents or extended family, but you still wonder if your parent will do to your kids what they did to you. Some of you have parents who threaten to harm themselves or even harm your other parent if you don't show up, and you can't keep calling 911, so it's just easier to show up. Some of you are still trauma bonded and think that it can still change. Some of you are afraid of the shame and the idea of any kind of no contact, or the idea of estrangement and the shame that estrangement brings up for you, which is incredibly understandable. Some of you would go no contact if you could, and have fantasies of what your life would be like if you did not ever have to deal with your parents again. Unfortunately, the article I read was not as balanced as it could have been, and it sort of simply wrote off the painful decision around estrangement or no contact as almost sort of like an easy way to not have to deal with the family anymore, which I believe missed the point. And then, of course, they interviewed old guard therapists who think it's just so terrible that any therapist would ever encourage a client to go no contact. And by the way, therapists don't encourage no contact. Good therapists understand it and support a client in the client's own decision making. As therapists, we're not supposed to have an agenda, but we're also human beings. And we can witness what having ongoing contact is doing to our clients. Any therapist who's able to remain neutral at witnessing a client be reharmed every single time they have contact with an abusive parent may want to go empathy shop. If it was as simple as don't have an agenda therapist, then AI is coming for my job really soon, which I think frankly it already is. But of course, the pièce de résistance in these articles is the comment section. And here's where that article got really interesting. Most of the commenters were teed up to shame the folks who were estranged from their families and went after the therapists who supported the decision. They'd say things like, family is great, you need family, go family, being an adult is about compromise, these darn kids who just go no contact did that because their parent didn't give them their way. My guess is that a fair proportion of these commenters are the parents that the kids went no contact with, or just the really judgmental chorus of voices that shames anyone who has had to disengage from or distance from a family. The tricky thing with family is that family is about luck, like lots of things in life, but nowhere else is that luck more manifest than family. Some people get really, really lucky. They're born to loving, present, kind, well-regulated, patient people who listen. It doesn't matter if there's money or resource or not. I mean, money helps, but I've known folks raised in families where there were few resources, but there were lovely parents and other adults, and it was an inheritance like no other. And damn, the folks who grew up with resources and have really nice people, I mean, that's Powerball level luck shit. And some kids are born to narcissistic or alcoholic or mean or manipulative or deceitful parents who had no place having kids. These are dysregulated, cruel, withholding, abandoning, put their own needs before their child's needs people. That's just bad luck. The child is not responsible for their parents' lack of qualification or capacity to be a parent. It's bad luck. So when folks take the anti-estrangement, you must stay in contact, you only have one family stance, they're basically saying, play the bad hand you were dealt, no matter the harm it does to you, to which I say, F that. Encountering a narcissistic or toxic or harmful relationship in childhood is very different than if it happens to you for the first time in adulthood. And as a result, things that are done to us in adulthood, for example, what we may encounter in a relationship with an intimate partner or a friend, may not do the same level of scathing harm that it does in childhood. The silent treatment, the withholding, that stuff in childhood is lethal. It terrifies the child who is genuinely afraid that the parents will go away and metaphorically and literally disappear. So the child will do anything to end that silent treatment and slowly then get subjugated into a cycle of being that parent's narcissistic supply, emotional babysitter, tool of regulation, and being the parent's parent. How is that forgivable? All of this shapes the child's identity and frankly thwarts the child's identity that now gets shaped solely around the idea that I have to be what my parent wants so I can be loved, and then ultimately sets a person up for a lifetime of subjugated relationships if the cycle doesn't get broken. And folks, as you know too well, this is not an easy cycle to break. And parents are like kryptonite. You may actually be functioning well in other areas of your life, like work and friends, but then having to see that parent again can lead you to feel like that subjugated and scared child again. And that parent is not going to change. So for some folks, no contact or avoiding contact is the only path forward. Even in the article, there were parents interviewed who felt oh so sad about how much of their adult children's lives that they were missing, graduations and weddings and grandkids, and a small acknowledgement like, yeah, I was an alcoholic, and yeah, I screamed a lot and made the house a scary place, but that was then. Can't they see that I'm trying? It's not a child's job to see that you're trying, whether that child is a child or an adult. That parent has to recognize that we get one chance at childhood, and the harms that are done at that time, while to some degree are fixable, those fixes aren't easy. And even with the fixes, those wounds don't ever go fully away. So the adult parent still makes it about themselves. Oh, I'm missing out on so much, and sure, I did a few bad things, rather than my behavior must have been terrifying for a child, and it wasn't okay. Making amends doesn't mean the other person has to accept them. And even the most skilled apology does not carry with it the requirement that the other person has to take it and clean the slate. Perhaps the only way to move forward is to recognize the slate will forever remain messy, and then backing that up with radical acceptance. All of that means that your parent likely will always remain locked into these patterns. Choose accordingly. Many people who are estranged struggle until the end of their parents' lives and beyond. Should I have gone to visit? And then, for those who do go visit, will say, "Oy, that was a mistake." There are no winners in this. For some folks, the only way to maintain a healthy adult life is to go no contact. And given what we know about any kind of antagonistic or toxic personality style, that makes sense. The parent is not likely to change, and the subjugation cycle will then shift to how selfish and unforgiving that you are, that you can't just let go of the past, Junior, and they were just not ready to be a parent, etc., etc. You know the drill. Listen, I can say this as a therapist. I have worked with many, many clients where in my heart, my hope was that they would go no contact, because I could see how devastated they were every time they had contact with their parents or their family of origin. And they were living their lives in a psychological purgatory with parents who had no capacity for insight. But it wasn't my place to say go no contact. My role was to support their decisions and shore them up for the inevitable disappointment and help them connect the dots. I have also had clients go no contact and doubt that decision every single day. And every so often, there was a client who went no contact and blossomed, and they saw that the going no contact is what contributed to their growth. There is one more twist here. And that is, if you are a parent who is disengaging from a toxic, narcissistic, manipulative, antagonistic child, it raises similar issues. Now, if the parent who's disengaging is antagonistic and the child is antagonistic, then all bets are off, and I just hope that nobody really gets hurt. But if the parent who's choosing to disengage is not antagonistic, or perhaps one parent was and the other parent was not, and the non-antagonistic parent is the one who's choosing to disengage, the damage is done where the child's concerned. Some parents, after years of being financially abused, lied to, taken advantage of, raged at by their child, will come to this decision as well. Again, it's not easy and even more complex, because a parent making this decision may also reflect back onto what was their contribution on their own child's behavior. Estrangement is like a train depot with lots of lines coming in and out. There's no simple pathway to this. So no, TikTok or YouTube or the internet is not what is leading people to become estranged from their toxic, harmful, invalidating families of origin. It's the family's behavior that's leading to that. Everybody wants to belong to a family system, and nobody gives it up lightly. But for the first time ever, we're having deeper conversations about what the meaning of going no contact from a harmful family system is, the grief around it, but also understanding that in some cases, some people actually find solace in it, and that instead of shaming people who make an incredibly difficult decision, perhaps we all need to pause a moment and really hear their story. Thanks again.